Shavua Tov, Parashat Shoftim. The rabbis tell us that one of the most powerful prayers ever uttered was said by Rabbi Akiva. In a time when there was a problem and some different rabbis got up to say prayers, none of them achieved success with them until Rabbi Akiva got up and said two simple words, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. And these two words unlocked the gates of heaven, and the prayer was answered. And therefore, this formulation becomes a central part of our high holiday liturgy with the famous Avinu Malkeinu prayer, which goes on verse after verse. We've added to it over the centuries because it is such a powerful and effective formula. What is the secret of its success? I believe it's 5 words in our parsha, one pasuk, which says the following: Tamim tihyeh im Hashem Elokecha. You shall be pure, you shall be complete, you shall be innocent, perhaps. Tamim is innocent also, with the Lord your God. In other words, our relationship with God has to be simple and uncomplicated. And I would like to discuss a few ways that we can do this. First, let's look at the context of this verse. It's telling us that we shouldn't be consulting the horoscope. We shouldn't be going for the tarot card readings. We shouldn't be going to the soothsayer, no matter how nice the sooths they have to say are. In other words, we shouldn't be concerning ourselves with trying to tell the future. The Torah says this in the context of not turning to different practices of witchcraft and so forth in order to tell the future, but rather we shall be pure, innocent, if you will, tamim, with the Lord our God, and not seek to tell the future. This is a very important piece of information, because sometimes we tend to think, if I could just know what's going to be, I can manipulate things and go a certain way, and maybe I'll change my fate, as it were. Well, Am Yisrael has a different relationship with God. For example, we have in the Parsha the very dramatic description of the Jewish army before they go out to fight the battle. First, there comes one speaker which gives them an exhortation to have confidence. They say, if you're going to see the horses and the swords and the ballistic missiles, doesn't say ballistic missiles, but we're filling in the modern blanks, and you're going to get scared and you're going to be terrified and so forth and so on, says, don't be. The God who brought you forth from Egypt is going to be with you, and therefore you will prevail. Have no fear. So first of all, that's an important lesson in and of itself for us to hear in these days when the world media is giving us 101 reasons why we should be terrified. Well, we are not terrified because we are walking purely and innocently together with God. But then the verses go on and describe that there are certain people who are going to be exempt from this war. Who is the one, says the speaker, who has built a new house and didn't dedicate it? Go home and dedicate your house, lest you die in the war and someone else dedicate it. The same thing for somebody who planted a vineyard or who betrothed a woman. So these are reasons for people to leave the battle. Now, the rabbis say that not everybody who goes when they say these things is going because that they built a house or planted a vineyard or betrothed a woman, but rather for the last reason given by another speaker who says, who is the one who has a faint heart, who is afraid? Let them leave rather than cause everyone else to panic together with them. So the rabbis point out that there are two interpretations in the rabbis as to what this fear is about. The first one is the simple explanation that we're dealing with somebody who has panic. And when they have panic attacks, they can cause a breakdown of the fighting force. If all of a sudden the guy's going to pieces, he might cause other people to go to pieces too, and it's better for him to go home. So that certainly makes sense. However, there's another interpretation. Why is the person afraid? Because they're afraid that they have sins, and maybe their sins, they are afraid, will catch up with them in the heat of battle. So therefore they leave. And so the commentaries say that what's happening here is that nobody wants to own up to that, right? If when the person gets up and says, whoever is afraid, and they're saying afraid because of their sins, then people leave, then people are going to look at them and say, oh, sinners, that's why they're leaving. So therefore, they could leave earlier when they made the announcement about the house, the vineyard, or the wife. Now, whatever the case may be, somebody who's afraid of their sins is exempt from fighting this battle. That seems to be everybody. Isn't everybody somewhat afraid of their sins? Is there somebody who's so righteous that they have no sins whatsoever? Indeed, the maskilim, the more emancipated Jews, as we would call them, who were leaving tradition, used to make fun of the Jewish concept of a war. It's a well-known incident. They made a skit, a spiel, to make fun of this, and they just depicted what a Jewish army would look like. So you had all the people there, and then the first one gets up and says, who built a new house and didn't dedicate it? And so a whole bunch of people leave. Then the next one, a vineyard, another bunch of people. Betrothed a woman, another bunch of people. There are not so many left. And then they say, who is afraid? Who is afraid of the sins in their closet? They should also leave. And then everybody leaves except for two very old, bent-over rabbis with long white beards. They were making fun. That's what a Jewish army looks like. Two old Jews. And I believe it was the Netziv of Volozhin or another great rabbi of the 19th century who said, you know, this portrayal is actually accurate. This is what a Jewish army looks like. It's two old Jews. But what the mockers forgot to mention was that these two old Jews are going to win the war. So, notwithstanding, it seems like everybody would be going because they have some sin. Who is so righteous that they're going to say they're perfect? I think everybody would be a little bit afraid that whatever they feel guilty about is going to come back and zap them during the heat of the battle. I don't think that the exemption is for people to leave because of their sins. I think that the sin here, if you will, is the fact that they're afraid of their sins. In other words, if the nation is going to fight a battle, a war, that is crucial for them, that is a milchemet mitzvah, a divinely ordained war to preserve the nation of Israel and the land of Israel, so that mission should be such a motivating mission that a person shouldn't be concerned about their sins. They should be concerned about winning that war. And they should all stand up and be counted. If somebody is concerned about their sins, that shows that they're not committed to the purpose of the battle, but they're committed to their own survival. And such a person should not be in the Jewish army. The Jewish army is made up of people who are committed to achieving the goal of protecting the nation of Israel and protecting the land of Israel, just like our brave and incredible soldiers in this very day and age. So there you see one application of being pure and innocent with God, focused on the mission, focused on whatever it is that needs to be done, and who cares about what the future holds, who cares what the consequences are. We do what is right, we do what God demands of us. A second explanation is that sometimes there may be other ways to have religion or spirituality that may be very tempting and seductive. And you'll note that in last week's parsha, when it talks about the false prophet, it says that the false prophet who prophesies in the names of other gods, asher lo yadata, that you did not know. He's seducing you to worship gods that you did not know. And we can ask the question, and if we do know those gods, it's okay? Why is the Torah saying that they're seducing us to worship gods we did not know? What's the difference? If they're other gods and they're not God himself, and they're false gods, so whether I know them or not know them, it's still bad. Why does the Torah say did not know? And the answer is because the gods that we know, maybe we already have been through that and we've seen that they're phony. But there is a certain lure, there is a certain attractiveness to the exotic, to the far away, to the far east. The other philosophies, and maybe we can bring that aspect of worship into our religion. Maybe the way that they do some ceremonies is more meaningful than what we do, and maybe we should adopt their practices. The Torah says so in this week's parsha expressly that you shall not learn to do what they do in their worship, because their worship eventually leads them down a path towards great corruption and evil. So we do not look to them. There's a famous story that's told about a young woman who was becoming religious, and she was already studying Jewish law, and there was a class on the laws of returning a lost object, and it was getting to be fairly dry and legal. How do you identify a lost object that can be claimed? Is there a sign on it? And where was it found? And how did it look? And so forth. And all of a sudden she said, something, this is not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for spirituality. I'm looking for faith. I'm looking for experiences. I'm not looking for all this legal stuff, this Jewish law school stuff. It's boring me. I want religion. So she went off to India and found herself a guru and was on her way out from the Jewish religion and was very happy. There was meditation, there was yoga, there was all this spiritual stuff, light and breathing and all that cool stuff, right? Meditation, by the way, for the record, is a very Jewish practice. Read Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's book on Jewish meditation. We came up with the idea. But that being what it is, she was looking for something, else. And then one fine day, she's walking down the street with her guru, and they see a wallet sitting on the sidewalk. Well, she immediately thinks, oh, this has to be returned. But the guru said, oh, thank God, I found this wallet, picks it up and puts it in his pocket. She's a little bit horrified. What do you mean putting it in your pocket and taking it and thanking God? You're going to return it, right? It's a wallet. I'm sure there's a driver's license. I'm sure there are credit cards, money. There's valuable stuff, and there's the name of the owner. It'll be easy to find them and return it to them. No, says the guru. This is fate. Fate gave this to me. And immediately her mind went back to the classes on the returning of lost objects from her seminary in Jerusalem. She realized, something? I misunderstood just how spiritual that stuff is. And she turned right around, went back to Eretz Yisrael, and became a Ba'alat Teshuvah. So there we have the second idea of Tamim Tiyeh Meshem Elokecha. We follow Judaism. We follow our traditions. We don't look elsewhere to try to bring in innovative ways of increasing spirituality. We don't need it, because our Torah and our connection to Hashem has everything that we need in that regard. A third aspect of to be pure with God is the rabbis of every generation. First of all, we have every generation with its own leaders, its own spiritual leaders, and it is important for us to have our own personal rabbis who are alive and breathing. We don't live from the rabbis of the past. We certainly learned their Torah, and they certainly passed us the tradition, but they are not around anymore, and it is important to see your teachers. So first of all, you have to go, as the Torah says, to the court that exists in your days, not at the court that existed in previous days, because they're not around anymore. You need to have living teachers of Torah, transmitters of the transmission of the tradition. That's first of all. But beyond that, the Torah tells us a really, one could say, shocking law. Lo tasur, do not depart from what the rabbis, the sages, the court teaches you, to the right or to the left. And the rabbis teach us in the Midrash, even if they say about the right that it's the left, and about the left that it's the right, you still listen to them. In other words, you may be 1,000% convinced that the court issued a wrong ruling, that the rabbis taught us something that was incorrect. And you know what? You might even be right. But you still have to follow them anyway and do against what you are convinced is the case. And such is the famous story from Talmudic times when the Sanhedrin of Rabban Gamliel, which was located in Yavne, declared one year when Rosh Hashanah was, and therefore when Yom Kippur would fall. But there was a Rabbi Yehoshua, who was a great sage as well, who had a different opinion. He was convinced that Rabban Gamliel had erred, and that Yom Kippur was supposed to be on a different day, day before, day after. I don't remember if it's clear in the story. But it was supposed to be on a different day. And he was very, very clear and adamant about his position. So Rabban Gamliel said to him, Rabbi Yehoshua, I command you to arrive in the court on the day when you think it's Yom Kippur, with your wallet, with your staff, with your briefcase, whatever it was, to show that you are holding that this is not a holy day, but it's a weekday. In other words, he demanded that Rabbi Yehoshua go against what Rabbi Yehoshua himself believed to be Yom Kippur in order to show obedience to the law that was decided by Rabban Gamliel and the court. And indeed, Rabbi Yehoshua fulfilled that, even though he was sure it was wrong. And Rabban Gamliel came and hugged him and kissed him and said, you are my teacher and you are my student. You're my student in as much as you followed the law that we decided, and you are my teacher because of your character in being able to do this. So this is what the Torah is teaching us. We follow our rabbis, even if we're 100% convinced that they're wrong, and we might even be correct. For example, there are laws that we know for sure that we're doing something that should be wrong. For example, there's a rule that if somebody wishes to get money out of someone else, they come to the court and they claim, Shimon owes me money, but they don't have a proof, and Shimon denies it. But they have no contract, they have no witnesses, they have no way to prove that Shimon owes them the money. But you know what? Really, Shimon does owe them the money, and they're 100% sure of it, and you know what? Shimon may be lying. But Shimon denies it, and there's no proof. So then the court's ruling will be that Shimon does not have to pay Reuven, because hamotzi mechavero alav haraya, the one who wishes to bring money out of someone else must bring the proof. And that is the rule. So it could happen that the court is wrong, factually. But the principles of the court, the rules of the court, have to always be preserved. We have a really fascinating one. In a law called Rov, the majority, we follow something called Bitul Barov, that something becomes nullified in the majority. So let's say I'm at the plate, at the table. I have a plate and I'm sitting at the table. And on the plate, there are 4 pieces of chicken. And then I find out that one of those pieces of chicken was treif, was not from a kosher butcher. The other 3 were kosher. Can I eat the chicken on my plate? According to one opinion in the Rishonim, I can eat every single one of those 4 pieces. Why? I'm certainly eating the non-kosher piece. How is that possible? Because we have a rule. We follow the majority, and the majority is mevatel. It nullifies the minority. So according to this opinion, the non-kosher piece became kosher because it was in the minority, and it was in a situation where there was no way to tell the difference, and it was mixed together on the same plate. Right? There is one rabbi who says you have to take one piece out, and then we will assume that the piece you took out was the non-kosher one, and then the rest of them, each one of them you can say comes from the majority. I'm not getting to the halachic details, but here you have a situation where in all likelihood a person is eating something which was non-kosher, but it's kosher because the rules of the Torah are supreme. And that also is what it means to be pure in the eyes of God, to follow the rules of the Torah, even if we may think that it's not correct. Because once we put our opinion, and even in a case where we are correct factually, once we put our opinion above the opinion of the sages and the rabbis, so then the whole system gets destroyed. So that's why that is so critical and so important. So this is, I think, the power of the Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu, our Father. First of all, this is our Father with whom we have a unique relationship. A person can never have another father. And therefore, yes, one can have an adoptive father, but that's not what we're talking about here. And therefore, we don't seek our spiritual connection to God by any other religion at all. It is exclusive. And we don't seek our connection, our ways to go forward by trying to figure out what the future is going to be. What our Father is asking us to do, that is what we do. What our King commands us to do, Malkeinu, the King commands, the subjects obey. They don't come and say to the King, no, I couldn't observe the commandment because it didn't make sense to me. One would never say that to the King. So when we relate to God in the same way, we would never say such a thing like that to the King. The first verse of the Avinu Malkeinu is Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Ein lanu melech ela ata. We have no king other than you. That is the secret power of Avinu Malkeinu. And in these days of the month of Elul, leading to Rosh Hashanah, it's time to rededicate to being pure Jews, having a pure relationship with God, doing what He asks of us to do, doing it with a complete heart, not seeking all kinds of sophisticated religious practices, but rather staying within tradition. And this is the way that we will have very powerful prayers that will, God willing, pierce the gates of heaven and bring blessing and good tidings to Am Yisrael. Shavua Tov.